Welcome to the Snowbirds Expat Radio Podcast. I'm Jerry Scott, founder of the Snowbirds US Day Tracker and the Canada Physical Presence Tracker app. Today's episode, why should you work with a qualified cross-border team? And when I use the word team, I'm talking about your cross-border financial advisor. I'm talking about your cross-border accountants, somebody who's licensed on the US and the Canadian side. And of course, it'd be your immigration lawyer as well. May it be Canadian or a US immigration person. Today's episode is really geared towards that expat that's moved up to Canada here. And today's guests, I'm going to go through their profile and tell you a little bit about them. We have a husband and wife team, and I know Pat and Jim very well. They've become two of my favorite people here in British Columbia. They have a family-run business where they provide Canadian and U.S. tax returns. And both Pat and Jim are dual citizens. Jim, we were just talking about the Stanley Cup, and he was 3 years old the last time they won. So if you're quick at doing your math, that was 1967. So do the math. The bottom line is, the point that Jim was making was he's got lots of experience in cross-border tax. Now, Pat is both Pat and Jim, like I say, they're dual citizens. They were raised in Canada. They went back and forth, and they basically had their careers in the United States on the tax side. And basically, in the last 10, 15 years, Pat and Jim have moved back to Canada, lucky us, and they're just down the road from us. They're in Port Coquitlam, and as mentioned, they do both Canadian and U.S. tax returns. And the first question when I was talking to Pat a couple of days ago was, which return do you do first? Do you do the Canadian return or do you do the U.S. return? Now, Pat gave me a great answer. She says, I do them both at the same time. So we're going to talk about all kinds of things today, but just to get us going, I want to find out more about Pat and Jim. I mean, today is, we're early into 2023. And Pat and Jim, fill me in. What have you been doing for the last 20 years?
Well, I've been public practice accounting now for almost 30 years, 28 plus years now. About half of it in Canada, about half of it in the US. I've specialized in cross-border for about the last 20 years. I have a master's from Golden Gate in US tax. I have a CA, which is now a CPA in Canada, and I have a CPA from Washington State.
And Pat, we want to hear from the brains of their operation. So you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, pretty similar stuff. Now, Jim's the only one who was diligent enough to go after the masters. I have licenses on both sides too. In Canada, started out as the chartered accountant, and we went down to the Seattle area and got my CPA. Same thing. And we worked down there, a good at least 11 years or so. It was when we had our son. You know how kids change everything. And when we had our son, we came back up to Canada and thought we would put in roots here. And as you can imagine, the most natural fit in the world was to, you get up here and you realize, wow, there's a lot of U.S. people up here and they need their taxes done. So it was pretty natural for us to slip into that role.
We are hearing that there's north of 1 million Americans living in Canada. And I believe that number is changing all the time with, for whatever reason these people are coming up here for. May it be work, love, whatever the case is, or just looking for a change of pace. And Canada does provide that change of pace. So when we were talking earlier, we were coming up with, how do we really break this down? And the biggest thing that we talked about U.S. people moving up to Canada is that it's the easiest border to cross in the world for a lot of reasons. But the biggest thing that we have a difference between the two countries is the terminology of with what we call RSPs, which is a retirement savings plan, and of course in the States so-called IRAs. So Pat and Jim, tell us more about that confusion and what are people taking for granted? And just fill us in.
Oh yeah, I personally like that one because it's not a pet peeve or anything, but it's certainly one that we see a lot of in our office. We'll get people clients that'll come to us and of course you need to know what they have, and they will say, oh, I have an IRA in the States, and a lot of times. People think, well, you can ignore the IRA. It's just like an RRSP. It grows tax deferred, and we don't have to report it anywhere special. So you kind of move on, so to speak. But that's not really the case because there is an IRA, a traditional IRA. And if you ask a little closer, you can ask the person, you say, do you have a Roth IRA? If it's a Roth IRA, there is no ignoring it. There's not at all. I mean, a Roth IRA does not grow tax deferred. It is more like a Canadian tax-free savings account, so to speak, not the RRSP type. So what's that mean to the US person? Well, it means they actually have to ask Canada to allow it to grow tax-free. That involves a letter. That involves getting the details out and asking them, can we do this? And they'll allow you, but you have to ask. If you don't, you're not going to be compliant. And then you're going to be offside with Canadian tax law. Not to mention, if you don't, you need to report the income. You yourself, as a U.S. person, need to figure out how to get the income, how to calculate the income earned in that account, and report it each year. So there's and that's just in terminology. That's the difference between actually having to file forms and report income on your income tax return to doing nothing. And it was all a matter of, is it an IRA or a Roth IRA? Terminology. That's all.
And it really does lead us to this other question. We were talking about tax and we're talking about planning. And we use this term, which is called holistic planning. And that's the other thing that you two wanted to talk about, because there's so many things to consider. And Jim, fill us in. I mean, when we use that term holistic, coming to planning, fill us in when, what's going on out there with these people that are on both sides of the border?
Well, to me, holistic planning, it really comes down to something very, very, very simple. If you're doing little pieces all over the place and one isn't attaching to the other, okay, it usually ends up being very expensive, and it usually is not very effective. What I try to tell clients when they come to see me is I tell them, at the end of the day, my concern is that what is left in your pocket? I don't care who's taking it out, whether it's fees, whether it's taxes, whether it's anything else. My concern is to make sure that as much as possible is left in your pocket. And the other part that I find about holistic planning is, we used to have a saying when I was an audit manager, the money's made in the planning. If it's planned well enough, it'll run itself. If it isn't, it'll completely screw up. And to clean it up will be amazingly expensive, and your returns probably will have been really, really crap. For example, if I've got a decent financial planner that I'm working with, I don't have to worry about him starting up a tax-free savings account for somebody and putting $5,000 in it and then sending it to me. And then I got to tell the client that, hey, you know something? This investment that made you $500-600 last year maximum is now going to run you almost $1,000 just to process the paperwork on it. Like I said, at the end of the day, my job, and hopefully the financial planner's job, if he's doing his job right, and the lawyer's job, is to make it as smooth as possible and to make the returns as great as possible, to make, at the end of the day, the pocket as full as possible. Excuse me, I used to live in New York, so I still have a tendency to talk in the New York fashion.
Hey, that's pretty good, because when Pat and I were talking earlier, we use this as a great example, is that without the planning, a person has an IRA in the States and they say, well, you know what, I want to, my financial advisor who works for a Canadian bank and he's licensed on the Canadian side, he says, you know that you can move that IRA through a 60J rollover and roll it into your RSPs. And Pat, let's take off what we were talking about a couple of days ago. What's the advantages and what's the disadvantages of a IRA rolling over to an RSP?
Well, when it comes to, and I say specifically on the advantages, that's up to the client. That's a matter of you ask the client, why do you want to roll it over? I don't get too much into that. The taxation is mainly a lot of clients think that because they're just easily moving across the border, like you said, it's a pretty easy move, that their assets will easily move with them too. And it's not quite that easy. There is a border there. When you have say a traditional IRA and you're going to move it over into your RRSP, you can do that, but it's not a tax-free rollover. And a lot of them don't quite, that's where they stop and they say, oh, I thought I could move it over tax-free. You can if you plan it well enough, if you're prepared to go through the right year, you get a planner is the easiest thing, and an accountant to move it, and do the right steps for it, and then you have to top it up because there is tax that's going to be taken on the U.S. side. That's without a doubt. And if you top it up on the Canadian side, you might get the full credit in order so that on your Canadian tax return, you don't pay taxes. That's getting into a little bit of minutia that's hard to visualize, I guess, over a podcast. But one of the I guess drawbacks would be it's not as tax-free as you think, and you need to know a little bit more detail about it. Is it an IRA that you can move over into your RRSP? Most people, I think, Jerry, we were chatting about, the traditional IRAs, you roll it into an RRSP, and there's no question about is there room or not. The room is made for a traditional IRA. You don't have to worry about, do I have contribution room? Other types of IRAs, you do have to worry about whether or not you have enough contribution room. So those are the kind of things that you want a cross-border person to check out for you before you start making moves that will cost you money.
And on this one here, Jerry, on this one here, it sounds simple, just top it up. But that top up, when you've made a major move, and if it's a large IRA that you're bringing up, that top up can be very hard to do. It can be very hard to come up with the money in a very short amount of time to equal it out. So I generally don't like to see people do this. I find it generally doesn't make a lot of sense. Now, the problem that we usually run into is once they've changed addresses, whatever institution they're working with down in the States usually wants to close the account unless somebody like yourself is available to handle it from both sides. That's usually the issue that we run into and that we find most difficult, is that the institutions really aren't geared to deal with anybody living abroad.
Well, that question you can ask 3 advisors. You can ask an advisor on the Canadian side, what do you think? Is it a good idea? And arguably that Canadian advisor, it's more money under management, and he's going to say, yeah, what a great idea. I get to manage another $500,000. If you ask the U.S. advisor the same question, he might say, oh, you know what, don't worry about it. We'll use your brother's address. We'll get around it. Don't worry about it. And then you ask the cross-border advisor, and it really becomes more client-focused because maybe that U.S. person might go back to the United States one day for whatever reason. And that's a pretty big point, because if you roll over your RSP, if you roll over the IRA to an RSP, that's great. Like you say, Jim, sometimes those credits line up, and sometimes you've got a couple $100,000 lying around and it's not a problem. But what happens if you return to the States? You cannot roll over your RSP to an IRA. Bottom line. And we always tell people, why do you want to trap somebody in a higher tax jurisdiction? Why do you want to do that? So it's always great to have have the flexibility. The other thing that Pat and I were talking about, when we talk about some accounts do not create RSP contribution room, and that's the traditional. It's the inherited IRA. And we're Pat and I and Jen as working as a team, we are seeing more of these. And that inherited IRA does not function. You got to have the room. It doesn't create the room. You have to have the room to roll that money into your RSP account. So once again, we always say the biggest thing we can talk about is terminology. We can talk about holistic. And the holistic is so that we can communicate with Pat and Jim and we really get to know these people. And, Pat, the other thing that we brought up was, how soon should you be working with that person? They just planned this trip. They planned this major event. They're going to leave the United States and move to Canada. And we used the analogy the other day. I said, "Hey, Pat, Melissa and I are going on a 1 month cruise. What do you think?" And she says, "Oh, what a great idea." And I said, "Pat, but we're leaving Friday." And Pat responded by saying, "What a stupid idea." So it's just a matter of a very short period of time. So Pat, let's go into that a little bit further. Is that how long when a person is planning a major event like we're talking about, how soon should they start talking to you?
Oh, excellent question. And I always tell my clients the minute they think of it, if once they're serious and they're and I don't mean serious, I've made the decision, I'm going to move now. It's when they're thinking about I'm going to move. That's when they want to ask your whole team, your planner, your accountant, everybody who's helping you with cross-border stuff. That's when you need to ask them, this is what I'm doing. How will it affect me? And what do I need to do? What do I need to think about? That's really where the idea of having a cross-border team shines, because that's where I can give a person information such as it'll cost you X number in dollars if you move because of this, and I give them a reason. Well, at least they'll know what they're going to have as a tax bill and be able to budget for it. They'll know, oh my gosh, I'll need a year to do that. Or I might even come up, the better thing for me to say is, if you were to allow us to help you, maybe let's give it a year's time, you might not have to pay anything, on this tax bill. Let's get you in shape to move. Let's put things where they need to be to move. That would be a much better idea. Letting them know what they can expect is often a bit of an eye-opener for them. It's not just a move when you're doing cross-border.
Well, we came up with that great saying of have a plan before you land. And of course, we were thinking about the acronym earlier, and it's called fail to plan, plan to fail. Now, moving along, the next thing that's really, really important is we asked that question, when is the best, what returns do you file first for a U.S. person living in Canada? Do you file the Canadian return first, or do you file the U.S. return? Because the U.S. return is due on April the 15th, and obviously you can have extensions. The Canadian return is filed on April the 30th. So I'll let you two take over on your approach to a dual citizens filing tax returns in Canada.
We always try, we tell all of our clients, and I think we even spell it out in most of our emails. We absolutely work on the methodology of first person in is first person out. And since all of our clients are, 90% or plus are dual citizens, we're dealing with both the Canadian and US tax return both. And it just makes sense to us that while we are able to, we work on both returns, because the returns are interactive. They're not, it actually isn't something that can be done in isolation. Generally, you have to work with both returns. There's foreign tax credits that go across both. So, and even though I've said that, we also tell our clients, because the U.S. returns are due, as you said, Jerry, they're due April 15th. Citizens abroad, they have that automatic 2-month extension till June 15th. But that doesn't mean that the taxes are due any later. It just means your filing can be done a wee bit later, okay? So still, we ignore that in regards to it all has to be done at the same time. Canada has that April 30th, it's a hardcore. April 30th, it's either on time or you're late and you'll get a penalty. So when we get in past the first week of April, we focus on all our Canadian tax returns and we extend our US people. Okay. Now that doesn't mean we don't try and do them together up to the point that we can no longer do them together and get everybody out. We do US Canadian together. And then after that, last part of April, we focus to get the Canadian out so that there's no penalties on them, and we extend the US. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I was going to add to that. Um, here's what I find surprises expats, at least from an accounting point of view. They get up here and they figure they can get into their accountant really easily and see their accountant. What they're not realizing is one, this is a very specialized area. Anything dealing with expats from the US is going to be a very specialized area. So to get in is actually rather hard. So I try to get the clients to get their stuff in as early as possible. And what you'll find is making an appointment after February with most US accountants is really hard to do. This is where having a holistic team comes in. Jerry is much more likely to get through my telephone than somebody I do not know. I deal with them on a daily basis and I deal with them regularly. So therefore, when he calls, they know to patch him through. And I'm not just talking about me. I've worked in a few different offices, and it works that way every single time. If it's a repeat person that they deal with on a regular basis, that person gets through in the busiest of times. It's so you might run into things, but Americans should know they shouldn't necessarily panic when they come up here. It is possible, and they can do it themselves. They can extend themselves all the way till October. But what they will find is that they're probably not going to be able to drop their stuff off at any reputable firm and have it picked up like within a few days. They're probably going to have to wait a while to get their returns done. And they're going to find that their returns are going to be quite a bit more complex.
Now, Jim and Pat, one of the things that I saw on your website is that you do provide a lot of U.S. services for a lot of the accounting firms in the Lower Mainland here. How difficult is that? Or is it more difficult if they're doing the Canadian return at their firm and you're doing the U.S. returns at your firm? Is that more difficult?
It's only a little bit more difficult in non-communication because we only do it when we're able to communicate with the accounting firm. We have relationships with various accounting firms, and we do their U.S. work. So, and over time, it's both of us, both the Canadian firm and us, we realize that we need to be able to very quickly, like Jim said, when they phone, they get through. Because we know it's something that we're working on, a question that they have that we can answer quickly, and vice versa. It's only the only, I guess, extra, not harder, but there would be extra time in PDFing the file between our two portals type thing. But the firms must communicate. Well, we have to act as a team, right? Absolutely must communicate. That's the only way it can be done.
Where I find it's a problem using another firm, though, is in the planning. When you've got two different minds working on it, they'll have a tendency to diverge on a lot of key issues. That's why we do the Canadian. We find that most of the Canadian work that we do, we're doing it because we're doing the U.S. work, or we're doing it for a U.S. accounting firm. So when we're doing it ourselves, it makes for the planning end of our work a lot easier. And it saves a lot of time. We generally don't take Canadian work though up here unless we're doing the US work.
That brings up a very good point because when we are working with Americans that move up to Canada here on the investment side, the same thing. We try not to take those referrals from the Canadian investment advisors because the first thing that we have to do is educate them on the planning side. And Pat brought up, PFIC as a foreign investment company. And here's this advisor has sold him a Canadian mutual fund. And the first thing we do is, as we bring Pat in and Jim on the team approach, uh, that referral came from an advisor that's obviously made a mistake. And how do you cover for that advisor? And so we made it very clear that we aren't going to take any work um, from Canadian advisors. We're busy enough as it is on the investment side. The last thing I really want to cover is Pat and Jim. We've had the opportunity to present and work with a organization which is called Democrats Abroad. Can you guys tell me more about the Democrats Abroad and what is that organization? And I know the event we did a year ago during Super Bowl. It was very largely attended by a lot of American expats.
Democrats abroad, it is literally what it sounds like. It is an extension of the U.S. Federal Democratic Party, and it's the abroad extension. So there is Democrats Abroad Canada. That's who Jerry, you had done the webinar for last year. Was the Democrats Abroad Canada, and then there's Democrats Abroad, well, everywhere, Germany, Italy, wherever there's a U.S. citizen. And it is just, it functions just like I guess, just like the Democratic Party in the U.S. It goes around trying to educate U.S. citizens that are abroad as to, well, their responsibilities as U.S. citizens, like filing tax returns and following U.S. laws, even while they're living abroad. And they also try to provide useful resources to the U.S. citizens as a way of getting their donations to help them get out the vote, to let them know that they can vote and they should vote in the U.S. even though they live abroad. So they'll put out certain webinars that are of keen interest to U.S. citizens. Like, for instance, when you did the investment seminar last year, that was something that was well attended and definitely of interest to the U.S. citizens. That's what they try and provide.
What I found is beyond that, everybody likes to know the people from home. And being an American in Canada, it's not like we really stick out. We kind of blend in better than any other group up here. It is the one place where Americans, there's 4 or 5 really great events they have every year. And it's the one place where Americans get a chance to meet Americans.
And as a Canadian, I have to be fair here because I just went online and I see that there's a Republicans abroad and also Republicans overseas. So as a Canadian, we don't have those. It seems like Canadians can kind of sway back and forth of voting for the Liberals or voting for the Conservatives, but I find the Americans are very, very drawn out with their. If they're Democrats, they make it known, and if they're Republicans. And I'll tell you a funny story before we end up our podcast here. I have some very, very good friends in Maui, and and you try and bring everybody together. And as a Canadian way, when we bring on friends, you're gravitated to their personalities and the chemistry of each other. And I bring these 2 guys together and we're playing golf, and the Democrat, great person, comes up to me and kind of taps me on the shoulder and says, that guy's a Republican. And and it was almost, okay, so what am I supposed to do? Is he supposed to ride in the back of the car or the front of the car? I mean, you got to help me out here. So I wanted to leave on that note that it was quite comical for a Canadian when who we're concerned about our politics and who's leading our countries, and we'll complain about them and all the above. But in the United States, I found it to be a little bit more serious. So, but Pat and Jim, thank you very much for your time. And like I say, I enjoy working with you two. And the real takeaway here is that make sure that when you have hired that financial advisor who's a cross-border advisor, make sure that they have a great relationship with the accountants and the immigration lawyers you're working with. Because like Jim says, when Jerry calls Pat and Jim, they pick up the phone. They know our number, and there's nothing worse than having that call 2 or 3 or 4 days later. So anyhow, I appreciate your guys' time. So stay safe, and we will talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Snowbirds Expat Radio Podcast. Our app is available for your iPhone and your Android. If you have any questions, call me 604-612-7526. Until our next podcast, I'm Jerry Scott.